Yeah. Good morning from Indonesia. Selamat pagi, ta hao. Welcome to the second day of UNIFUR, University International Rector Forum 2021, hosted by Universitas Negeri Surabaya. I'm Wulan. I will be your host and moderator for today's event. In this occasion, I would like also to extend our gratitude to all of you for investing your time with us on this Wednesday morning. Now you are in the Studium Generale session as the serial of the UNIFUR that has been held from 23rd to 25th of November 2021. The Honorable Professor Dr. Nur Hassan MKes, Rector of Universitas Negeri Surabaya, the Honorable Professor Dr. Bambang Yulianto MPD, Vice Rector of Academic Affairs, the Honorable Dr. Sujarwanto MPD, Vice Rector of Planning and Partnership Affairs, the Honorable Mr. Asrori, SSMPD, the Head of Office International Affairs, Universitas Negeri Surabaya, the Honorable distinguished guests, speakers, excellencies, official person, Dean and Civitas Universitas Negeri Surabaya, our distinguished guests and participants. Ladies and gentlemen, our conference is about to start. So let's listen to the Indonesia National Anthem Indonesia Raya, followed by Unesa Mars. Host, please. Indonesia Raya, followed by Unesa Mars.
sumber daya manusia demi Indonesia tercinta.
Yeah. Our next agenda, we will listen to the welcoming remarks from our Rector of Universitas Negeri Surabaya, Prof. Dr. Nur Hasan MKes. For this occasion will be delivered by our Vice Rector in Academic Affairs, Prof. Dr. Bambang Yulianto, MPD. Prof, please.
Okay, thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Professor Bambang Yulianto, Vice Rector for Academic Affairs. Let me Rector Unesa's opening remarks. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam sejahtera, Om Swastiastu, Namo Buddhaya, salam kebajikan. Good morning from Surabaya. The Honorable Rectors, Speakers, the Honorable delegates and participants, we would like to welcome you to the Unesa International Forum of University Rectors, UNIFUR 2021, hosted by Office of International Affairs of Unesa, as we are celebrating the 57 years of success as one of leading universities in Indonesia. Today's general lecture is part of UNIFUR 2021. The discussion is expected to give a space for academicians and practitioners beyond the borders and connect you to the educational institution globally on the new trends of international diplomacy, research, and education. With this emerging topic, we thank the speakers and delegates. First, Mr. Muhammad Koba, ambassadors and deputy permanent representative of Indonesia to the United Nations in New York. Thank you, Pak Muhammad Koba. Second, Dr. Saniat Islam from Royal Melbourne Institute of Technology, Australia. The third, Professor Fuxin Han, PhD, from Institute of Psychology, Chinese Academy of Sciences. Fourth, Dr. Mercy Karunia Yesufadian from National Institute of Education. Ladies and gentlemen, let me start the remarks by understanding the current situation. We are facing challenges and crises recently, and we believe the opportunities are still open at the same time. The challenges that we face today are too big to be solved alone. Hard work, dedication, and collaboration become key factors to strive and survive, and we will win to write a new history of human life. If we learn from the pandemic, there must be innovation in business. Education is also the sector hit by the pandemic. Traditional approaches to this sector may collapse without collaboration, and transformative strategies must emerge, such as new trend of education or digital business. We need to integrate the emerging technology, information, and big data as the new capital to adjust business and education, even to breed the education and industrial sectors. Speakers, delegates, participants, ladies and gentlemen, Government of Republic of Indonesia through Ministry of Education Culture, Research, and Technology has initiated a policy intended to synchronize between innovators and investors, between education sectors and business and industrial sectors. The purpose is to establish a sustainable collaboration among these relevant parties. In this opportunity, I would like to extend my gratitude to the all parties to host the webinar today. One, organizing committee, Mr. Dr. Sucharwanto, Vice Rector for Planning and Collaboration, Mr. Asrori, Head of Office of International Affairs. This is the second education of UNIFUR. This is a great platform for international collaboration and in line with the strategic plan of the university 2020 to 2025. Good job. To deans, professors, and faculty members, thank you for the support and guidance for the forum and initiation for collaboration. Speakers, delegates, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Rector of Unesa, I would like to officially open Studium Generale as part of UNIFUR 2021 with Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. We do hope the discussion gives positive insights and opportunities to extend our collaboration, especially in the area of higher education, diplomacy, and business sectors. For all participants, happy conferencing and good luck. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Rector, Professor Nur Hasan. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor, for the excellent remarks. Now, before we going to the main session, please, we gonna take a bit memory for photo session. Yeah, our host will help us to take our photo. So please turn on your camera. Yeah, I will count from 3 to 1, okay? Are you ready, everyone? Yeah, okay. I will start from 3, 2, 1. Great, yeah. Next slide. Okay. 3, okay, 3, 2, 1. Yeah, perfect. I think that's enough. Now we are going to the main session. But before we begin the panel discussion, just a few suggestions and tips for you. Today's session is being recorded to be available for viewing post-conference, and you can access it on the Unesa official YouTube. And as a moderator, I will be monitoring the time, and we have about 2 hours and 30 minutes for these sessions. And each presenter today will have a total 15 till 20 minutes for their presentation and 10 minutes for Q&A. And if you have any question for the presenter, please type in the Q&A box. and I will help convey to the question to the presenter. The general comments and reflection on the presentation can be typed in the chat. So for the session, handouts, related material and resources can be found on our official website, unifur.unesa.ac.id or oia.unesa.ac.id after this session. And per feedback from this conference will be updated on our official website, so stick around. Ladies and gentlemen, today we have an amazing panel on public diplomacy, social culture, research, and innovation, where we'll be talking about the big trends, and we need to keep our eyes on that could directly impact your networking on education and partnership. And for our goal today is that whatever your role is in education and research industry, that you will come away with something, a new idea, a fresh perspective, a new strategy that you can apply to be more successful in your career. So let's get started. It's my pleasure to introduce our expert as the presenter for these sessions. So today we have four outstanding speakers from Indonesia, Australia, China, and Singapore. Will be the first speakers today, Dr. Mercy Karunia Jesufadian from National Institute of Education. Dr. Mercy, welcome. And the second speaker today, His Excellency Mr. Muhammad Koba, MA, as an ambassador and deputy permanent representative of Indonesia to the UN in New York. And will be the third speaker, my beloved Professor Pu Xin-han, PhD, from Institute of Psychology, Chinese Academy of Science. Welcome, Professor Han. And will be the fourth speaker today, Dr. Saniat Islam from Royal Melbourne Institute of Technology, Australia. Welcome, Dr. Saniat. I hope our four speakers already engaged with us here. And without any further delay, I will read the first speaker's CV. Dr. Mercy, good morning.
Good morning.
And yeah, I hope you are doing well.
Yes, I am.
Yeah,
Thank you.
before we start your presentation, allow me to read your CV first.
Thank you.
Yeah, host can help. Okay. Can you slideshow, please? Yeah. So Dr. Mercy Karunia Jesufadian is a lecturer and working in the National Institute of Education as a part of NTU, and she studied about the early childhood education to complete her PhD MED in early childhood education, and MA in English studies, and the postgraduate diploma in education. Yeah, and currently she has 3 funded research and also 2 outstanding publication in early childhood education. So Dr. Mercy today will present us about how to understanding the pandemic parenting from the stories of woes and overcoming. Yeah, Dr. Mercy, you have 15 minutes for present, and floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. All right, give me a few minutes. Let me pull up my slides. Okay, let me share my slides now. Okay.
Yeah,
Are
perfect.
you able to see it?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, give me a minute. Okay. All right. Thank you everyone for inviting me and allowing me this time to speak to you about our experience of pandemic parenting. And I want to share some findings from a current research study that we have been doing with low income earning families in Singapore with a particular service provider. And then I also want to share some of the research that has been in place over the last few years or at least from 2020, that we have been working on in Singapore, actually, so that we can so that I can share some of these thoughts with you. So let me go straight on into some of the key ideas that have emerged through research, right? So there are three major areas I think that we need to think about
Dr.
when we're
Mercy,
looking at the
Dr. Mercy,
troubles
pardon.
that emerged during the time of this pandemic. The main one, or one of the key areas that has emerged, is this issue of well-being, and then financial and energy and time as resources, and then the strains that has emerged in the relationship. So there are three major categories. One is self-care for parents and children, and then we have the issue of resources, and finally a comment to be made on the relationships that has emerged in this time. So when we look at the overall well-being, parents in Singapore experience some similar issues regardless of socioeconomic status and earning opportunities. So whether they come from like relatively poor families or they are well off, they still had similar issues that they experienced. The first one is increased anxiety. One of the key things was back in 2020 when we went into lockdown, what we call circuit breaker in Singapore, right? It was known, the anxiety levels really shot up. There was a great fear of illness. And because of this fear, and also with pandemic lockdowns, there was increased social isolation. So the usual limits, places that you would go to for your support or friendship or love, there was a lot of limits placed on it. So that sort of increased the anxiety that parents had. And then there was a clear fear of death. So family members who were ill, we didn't have such a high death rate in Singapore in the early days, 2020. We're seeing more now, relatively. But even so, it is still not as extensive as many other countries. But still, families were fearful of death, right? And then there was a worry over food in the early days, back in 2020, April, May 2020. There was a worry over food and other consumables. So we had a major tussle with toilet paper, right? And then research suggests that married persons with children in Singapore reported greater anxiety, right? So when we look at the nature of stress that it induced, number one, we had issues of stress coming from mental health. Mothers with young children who had to work from home, the home-based learning and school-related worries, the juggling was really very stressful for mothers who were also working and taking care of the family. And then financial health. Many people lost jobs or they had to find jobs quickly because they lost this one and then needed to find another one, or they had to go in for retraining. So there was a lot of anxiety on how am I going to earn money. This affected a lot of people who were self-employed, right? And then there was this increased health problems related to increased stress and anxiety. So that's another issue that emerged very strongly because individuals lost links to their usual support system. Self-care opportunities, it became very apparent that families that were living in smaller spaces, and we know that in Singapore, most of our homes are actually government-built flats, and families that are not so well off tend to live in smaller units, two-room units or one-room unit. Many of us who are not earning enough will be renting flats from the government, and those units are smaller. So families living in smaller spaces, or whether like, or maybe they're large families living in a 3-room flat or a 4-room flat, they felt that the space made it much more difficult for them to have quality time for themselves or even among family members. So the time for self-care was affected. The space inside the home was limited and they couldn't get out of the house because everyone was locked in. We also had playgrounds that were cordoned off, which is all this energy that the children had, they had to expend it some way. And if you had multiple children of different ages in the same house, it meant that it was quite crazy inside that house, right? So people were really, really tight and in a tense situation. We also had very limited food center. Like you can't even go out and have lunch or anything like that because the hawker centers were closed. Right. So I share some images with you. So this, you notice this is a playground, and these are the cordoning off. All our playgrounds were cordoned off this way. So the children could see the playgrounds but couldn't get in. Places where people just enjoy, sea breeze. There was no expense. Going to the beach doesn't cost you money so much. All these things were actually closed. It just made life very constrained for many families. Food became essential service, but you couldn't sit and eat inside. You had to buy takeaway, which also made it difficult for people to socialize, right? So that's one. So self-care and emotional stress, mental stress, that was one thing that went up. The other thing is resource limitation. Parents actually said their well-being was very much affected because they had financial predicaments. Earning money became much, much more difficult, right? And because they were doing so many things at the same time, they didn't have energy and they didn't have time. So because they were managing caregiving, looking after children and the home, and working full time, it became very, very draining, right? So a key finding that came out was that about 50% of Singapore's full-time employees actually rarely worked from home before the pandemic. But when the pandemic emerged, they had to switch swiftly to the work from home situation. And this caused a major disruption to usual family routines. So when your family routine is affected, or the children are at home now and you are not going to work, but you still had that much work to do, it made the anxiety levels go up, right? So both events led to increased mental stress, all right? And then the families that were more affected were families with young children, infants and children with special needs. So these families or this demographic was more affected by it, right? So financial woes, let me just give you some breakdown. The data comes from this study that I've listed up here. Monthly income on average fell 7% during the lockdown. That's April, May 2020. And about 17% of families in the studies looked at about 1,000 families, saw a decrease of more than 30% of the earnings, a large, sizable chunk, right? So Singaporeans of all walks of life, they actually saw a drop in earnings during the pandemic of 2020, 2021. The sectors that were severely affected, service sector, because workplaces actually closed, right? So we had that problem. Self-employed people could not. So taxi drivers, their earnings plummeted, and then they had to start quickly retraining. So there was a lot of pressure on individuals to study and train and then go into industries that they never thought of before. And all that increased their stress and their anxiety. So when you are so stressed as a parent and trying to juggle so many things, it also emerged that relationships, or the quality of the relationships that happened within the family, is actually deteriorated. So parents reported that pandemic actually impacted parenting practices as well as marital bonds. So because they had financial, mental health, and other concerns, looks like many parents resorted to authoritarian parenting style, right? So they use a lot of greater punitive punishments like spanking. So what they normally would not do in regular times, talk harshly to their children or even raise their hands against their children, because of the tensions at home and the space constraints, there was more scope for parents to become authoritarian and actually beat their children a little more. All right. So this happened. And instances of family violence saw a spike in Singapore, just like across the world, because they were confined in one space. And they noted a slight rise in divorce, but it may not completely be related to the pandemic. But I think the pandemic brought out certain fissures that were maybe suppressed in normal times. And that also led to divorce rates. So in summation, there are 5 stresses. that affected Singapore. And I think it sort of parallels other nations too. Number one, the social isolation was very numbing. It caused a lot of anxiety for people. The restrictions on travel, because in Singapore, travel is one major way Singaporeans actually relax. And it's a way of bonding with your family and going away for a while and coming back and restart recharging. So the travel industry in Singapore, traveling out of Singapore, that is actually quite a vibrant, dynamic industry, and that got shut down fairly fast. So travel was restricted, and then the worry started mounting. Family members' health and safety, also your own health and safety, because for many of them who are either primary earners, right, if they fell ill, that means their family will be plummeted into poverty. So that was one. And then, of course, the general inconvenience of working and doing business all increase the stress levels, right? Okay, so let's look at COVID-19 and the specific to parenting stress levels. So COVID-19, it was found by multiple studies, right? In Singapore, significantly increased stress, more so for families earning limited income or having poor estranged relationships. So if your relationship with your spouse was already rather weak, the pandemic made it worse. If your relationship with your children was also rather weak, it also made it worse. So these families went through quite a lot more during the pandemic. So we saw greater marital trouble. We saw a rise in child abuse, so physical abuse, verbal abuse, and then of course spousal abuse that also went up. So here we go. Energy and time, like I mentioned earlier, came down. It's finite and it's limited because we have, and more so in families that have multiple children in a household. Multiple demands of working from home. So this whole issue of childcare, home maintenance, cooking, and all of that raised anxieties. But we also found that families, even though they were suffering from many of these constraints, also managed to find coping strategies that pull them through. One of the biggest ones was actually spousal support. So families that were intact and husband and wife had a fairly good relationship actually leveraged on it to make that relationship stronger. So by supporting each other, they helped to bring down the other factors that were tensing the relationship, right? Extended family support and school support. So I want to talk a little bit now about how these specific factors in a group of families actually help to improve family stability. So the first one is this emotional support from extended family and friends. So even though we couldn't see each other, because the internet and mobile devices in Singapore are almost like 100%, every family has it, right? They were still able to stay connected. So technology actually helped to build bridges, right? So social isolation was not very overwhelming. The government actually subsidized internet costs for low-income homes and help children to get a device to study with. So now we're rolling out, after the pandemic experience, every child in Singapore will be getting his own personal computer given by the government to help them do their learning. Because this came up during the pandemic, parents with multiple children didn't have enough devices for study from home, which is called HBL, home-based learning. So now we are rolling this out. Every child in Singapore will get his or her own device. So because we are so technologically plugged in, it really did allow people to stay connected virtually. So that's one, emotional support from extended families and friends. The next big area that actually smoothed a lot of these tensions was actually school support for learning as well as financial support from schools. So school staff at preschools especially, the one that I worked with for my research, right, help parents with resume writing. They help them with job hunting. So if they lost a job, they came to the school and said, look, I need a resume. You need to tell me how this can be done. They went about doing it, right? They arranged for vital food supplies. So there was a lot of supplies, basic stuff, rice, oil, sugar, that kind of thing that came. And they were given vouchers about $80 or $100 of they actually got the food item itself, right? So the school actually provided the support. They actually connected these families with social agents who can actually provide these resources for them. And then specifically, they help with schooling costs and materials. So when children had to work from home and they didn't have the device connections, for example, internet maybe didn't work or something, they actually printed out the articles and actually sent it to the family. So the schools actually stepped in to help families cope with these sudden changes. Now, I was saying that finance has been a problem for many families. The government had very many schemes put in place to buffer income loss, so they keep families afloat. So special arrangements were made for self-employed to stay in business. So they actually gave them cash support. And then there was also support on rental. So the costs were brought down, or they didn't have to pay for that loan for 6 months. So the government actually made some processes in place so that families can earn and keep their money. And then existing personal resources to make ends meet. So many families said that they had savings and they managed to ward off hunger because they had that uh, savings and they had resources to pull through. It also came out in the research that out of two parents, if one parent remained employed, then at least that means that there's food on the table, right? And I think Singaporeans rallied, they made the effort to look for new options, or when the government provided retraining, they took it up and they moved jobs, right? So they did their best to make sure, because they needed the income flow coming in. So they coped with it. So what was the silver lining? I mean, all these difficulties, is always a silver lining. And in Singapore, what turned out to be the silver lining was actually the incubated time with the immediate family. Parents were able to actually see their children in a different light because they were at home the whole time. It provided new opportunities for care and interaction, and parents were able to connect strongly with their children when they wanted to. So they needed to overcome that initial irritation and lack of like knowledge on how to do it, and actually find ways to connect with their children and still get their work done. These families reported a stronger bonding. So here, the pandemic strengthened families because they felt that they needed to build the relationship intentionally. Many parents were actually aware that they were taking out their anger on their children, and they stopped themselves. So they were able to see how they can be better parents at this time, right? There were widely available online courses. Many parents took up more online courses during this time. So what this actually meant is that the daily disruptions and irritations that we have as parents when we have multiple children at home, they let it slide, and they just built closer bonds with children through communal activities like meal times, games, going for a walk. In Singapore, if you're going for a exercise or something like that, you don't need to wear a mask. So families started taking more walks and cycling. All right. Local policy also allowed grandparents to continue to care for the grandchildren, even though they were in two different households. And this meant that parents had less worry, and they could keep an eye on their parents as well as their children. So it really did help them overcome some of these tensions that they had. So some thoughts on family stability, which I think came through this experience of the pandemic and the research, right? The forces outside the family, like the pandemic, the virus, or whatever policies that the government comes up with to manage the virus spread, can buffet and destabilize families by cutting earnings and other resources. But families could still move towards stability when they leveraged on internal resources like faith and confidence that things will change. So some parents noted that the difficult times actually gave them a choice, either to grow together or grow apart. And many families actually chose growing together. The pandemic also made some fissures apparent, like I was saying earlier. Families which were not well, abuse and hostility, for instance, fell apart. But that falling apart also meant a healing could happen, because mothers moved to shelters away from abuse, or others file for divorce. It's a life change, but it could be changed for the better, right? So my personal observations, I want to end with this. I felt that, as I noted, I lived through the pandemic too. So my own family also lived through the pandemic, and my work and my research all came to this 2 points. Intentionality, what we intend and will, are actually key to keeping families together. So when love and acceptance is at the root of the relationships that parents build with their children and between themselves, then that family will hold true, right? Social support was very, very critical. Community institutions, schools, and neighbors became very crucial for vulnerable families who actually had few family resources to fall back on initially. They really depended on the community, and the community actually rose up to the challenge, right? Cultivating some form of mental relaxation. Many parents said this, meditative stances or listening to talks or music while at home for even about 10 minutes actually helped them stay out of the stress, right? And with the gradual reduction of restrictions, Singapore's hit more than 80% vaccination. So our restrictions are being eased. We are inching towards the new normal. So things are getting a lot lighter. We can eat out, we can go out. Now the travel bubble is up. So people are traveling out of Singapore. It's coming back a little less stressful now. And in Singapore, like I was saying, the infection rate remains below 1 now. And the vaccination travel lanes are getting wider. Singaporeans are feeling a little easy. but we still have to wear the mask. We can't escape that, but we are a little bit more normalized now, right? Yeah, so thank you very much, everyone, for giving me this opportunity to speak to you on the Singapore experience. And I hope some of the ideas that I've shared with you can be of use. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Mercy.
Okay.
Such a inspire presentation for us that we can learn about the parenting pandemic and how to make a stability of a well-being in the parenting. Okay. So for everyone participant, if you have a question for Dr. Mercy, please add them in the chat, and we'll be able to answer some of them during this Q&A. But if any question we can't get can be answered in the chat feature of the conference platform for this session. You can connect with the speaker one-on-one, yes, through a private message or meeting. Yeah. So any question for today? I think I have a question for you, Dr. Mercy. Yeah, how to solve the family well-being issue during this pandemic?
How to solve the family well-being issue, is it?
Yes.
Right. So I don't think there's one way to do it. In Singapore, what we've done, or at least the government has put in place, and then the social institutions have picked up on it, is to identify that, is to accept that these stresses have gone up, right? So we have to accept that. And then looking at each segment. So for example, when it comes to children, the schools step in a lot more to see how they can support the child. So when we look at well-being, they look at it in terms of each member. So for example, for children, what can the community do? So there has been a lot of work put in place where the school teachers actually step up. There's a lot more connection. So for example, in the preschool that I've been researching in, during the HBL period, home-based learning period, the teachers actually call the families up to see how are you doing, what help do you need, and then the other officers within the school who run things like, okay, what are the financial needs you have, what kind of food support can we give you? So they touch base every week, at least once they will call the families. So that's how they actually try to operationalize the well-being. So we don't just talk about it. We just say, oh, okay, we give you this money. And then we just give you the money and leave you alone also doesn't help, because we don't know how well you are coping emotionally with it. So the human touch becomes very important. So the schools actually take on that additional role. It's a lot more work for the school teachers, but they do it anyway. Then, of course, the social organizations that know of particular families, for example, social workers, they know there are specific families that they're working with. Again, there's greater human contact through calls or by home visits and things like that for particular demographics. So that's how we've managed the specific well-being issues of particular groups of people. Then generally a lot more helplines have opened up for the society. So you can call in the suicide watch people, all the family service centers have their lines open. So there have been these sorts of ways. We make the pathways open that people can come to you so that they don't feel shy, they don't feel like upset. And if they are upset, they actually know who to call. So that's how we operationalize the well-being bit, right? Which is honestly something that Singapore needs to sort of continue more on. The pandemic brought up this idea, this lack that there should be more human contact. And so they've started putting that in place now. So there's more talk and there's more engagement with your mental health. There's more engagement with your emotional health, so that people feel validated and valued. It's went up during the pandemic. So I think it will continue, and more emphasis will be placed on the well-being of people in general. So that's how we've done it.
So perfect idea, Dr. Mercy. So we have to do stability between the society, family, as well as the school, right? To build the well-being in the children during this pandemic COVID-19. Yeah. So I think that's a question from us here, Dr. Mercy, and I know you still have another appointment after this. So
Yes.
yeah, so you might leave first for
Okay.
this event.
Yes.
Yeah. So
Thank
thank
you for
you.
the
Yeah. So
opportunity again. And yeah,
yeah,
I have a
thank you so
medical
much,
appointment
and
and
yeah,
therefore
see you
have to
again.
go. So I
Yeah.
will catch up with you another time then. Thank you for the opportunity again.
Yes. Sure. So thank you so much, Dr. Mercy, for such an excellent presentation. And we will move to next sessions. Yeah. Which is we will have our excellencies speakers from Indonesia. But before we're going, we have 1 minute, yeah, to break and stay tuned. Again, and our second speaker today, we're talking about the higher education and culture exchange as the public diplomacy amidst the pandemic COVID-19. So please welcome His Excellencies Mr. Muhammad Koba, MA, as Ambassador and Deputy Permanent Representative of Indonesia to the UN in New York. Ya, Pak Koba, selamat malam ya di sana.
Selamat malam.
Ya, oke. Selamat pagi dari Indonesia. I hope there it's not the late night.
It is almost 10 p.m. here in the evening,
Yes.
so I'll try to do my best.
Yeah, so thank you so much for fulfilling our invitation.
Okay.
Mr. Koba, before we start our presentation today, so let me read first your CV. So Mr. Muhammad Koba is Indonesia's ambassador and deputy permanent representative to the United Nations. He graduated from Free J UNIFUR State, Brussels, with a master's degree in European integration and development. And also, he had been in the volunteering with AFS interculture programs and now employed as a General Affairs and Logistic Bureau and Director at the Indonesian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Yeah. That's the CV from Mr. Koba. And Mr. Koba, you have 15 minutes to deliver your presentation. So time is yours.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Good evening, colleagues. Good morning, everybody. Before going into details about the connection between education and diplomacy, I would like to invite you to understand the basic concept of diplomacy. Practically, diplomacy is the main instrument of foreign policy and global governance. It is also a method that governments use to influence the action of foreign governments through peaceful tactics, especially dialogue and negotiation. In its development, we have a series of specific types of diplomacy, including public diplomacy, economic diplomacy, and even gastro diplomacy. And there is no such thing as a limit to perfectly define any particular type of diplomacy. Academically, I would say it is an excellent approach to look at diplomacy that always evolves along the time. Certain types of diplomacy can even be a sub-object to explain another type of diplomacy, no matter which one comes earlier to the table. As the representative of Indonesia to the United Nations in New York, I feel obliged to touch upon what the multilateral diplomacy is all about. And before I start, I almost forgot, there's also another type of diplomacy, which is batik diplomacy. As you can see in the picture, me and my colleague, we were wearing a batik in the General Assembly Hall. The other colleague in the back, he didn't get the memo that day, so forgive him. So multilateral diplomacy is the practice of involving more than two nation states to achieve diplomatic solutions over international issues. The United Nations have several main bodies that function under specific purposes, such as the General Assembly, the Security Council, the Human Rights Council, and the Economic and Social Council. Here in New York, we work on multilateral negotiation on many issues, including education, that I would explain later. Observing education on this matter, we also need to understand the power of what so-called public diplomacy. I believe all of you are quite familiar with these faces. Yes, they are the BTS from Korea. This picture was taken during their working visit to the UN in New York recently, sponsored, of course, by the government. So public diplomacy is a communication strategy that goes directly and openly with other countries, including with all citizens and the press. This particular type of diplomacy explores the approaches of branding and advocacy to serve the purpose of painting a country in a good light to the public overseas. Branding is all about promoting a positive image of the country to the press and involves projecting ideas about the country's history, culture, and public policy in order to make it look attractive. Meanwhile, advocacy refers to public strategies with specific and case-by-case objectives, especially to justify the decision of on international matters. Now, let's move into detail on the definition of education diplomacy. Madam Moderator, I do hope that we can further discuss this on the question and answer session. Education diplomacy uses the skill of diplomacy, mostly public diplomacy, to promote effective cooperation across sectors excuse me, and among various actors to solve education challenges and advance transformational agendas for education. To exercise this diplomacy in multilateral fora, we need to explore a series of steps. Define or diagnose the challenge. For example, school closures due to some physical contact restriction during the COVID-19 pandemic. Understand the position and the capacities of relevant stakeholders that involve. During the pandemic, it is a must to involve IT or digital investment sectors to find a better access to virtual learning process. Find common ground about different priorities of an education challenge, such as when should we safely reopen school for in-person learning, and reach consensus on solutions to counter the challenge. Bear in mind that the solution might be different from each region or a country. And the last one would be lead the advancement and implementation of transformative agendas for education. This is a homework for all UN member states to make sure that what we have achieved is seriously delivered back home. As specifically requested to touch upon the higher education learning process in diplomacy, I'm pleased to discuss about another episode of New Modern Diplomacy to describe a number of formal and informal technical, research-based academic exchanges in supporting international partnership among nation states, which is science diplomacy. It focuses on developing action designed to directly advance national interests, to address cross-border interests, and primarily for meeting global needs and challenges, according to research-based findings. There are some distinctive approaches to clearly explain how scientists in the academic fora are able to work together with the government officials, especially diplomats, to push our national agenda forward. So we have science in diplomacy. Science can provide advice to support foreign policy objectives. Diplomacy for sciences, diplomacy that can facilitate international scientific cooperation, and science for diplomacy, scientific findings and cooperation that can improve international partnership and cooperation. This is a lot of example on this one, not in New York, but in Geneva. When I was posted in Geneva, I was in charge of a lot of MEA, Multilateral Environment Agreements. For example, on CITES, the Convention on International Trade of Endangered Species. Our LIPI, Lembaga Ilmu Pengetahuan Indonesia, they provided the science. For example, how many monkeys from Java that we can safely export each year without endangering their population? How many certain type of fish? How many turtles that we can export safely? So LIPI is in charge with the numbers, the safe number that we can export it. And then the Forestry Ministry, Kementerian Kehutanan, is the management authority who will enforce the guidelines from LIPI. Also, cooperation in vaccine, cooperation in education, cooperation in sport, all scientific based. After going through all this concept with a long discourse, let us move forward to the analysis section as another base for our question and answer session. In the practice of diplomacy, nation states have extended their national interests through education and science. The role of education and science in building mutual cooperation has been characterized by the term soft power. So rather than employing force, it is dependent on the strength of ideas and culture to influence the positive branding and advocacy, as well as friendships of others. Higher education is an ideal, excuse me, is an ideal vehicle for soft power. Promoting educational exchange is a widely accepted practice in public diplomacy. Many countries use academic exchange to help people from around the world develop mutual understanding and friendship. For example, the Fulbright program, the British Council, Institut Français, German Academic Exchange Service, Confucius Institute. So we a lot of example out there, and a lot of venues that the student can explore in the future. And how about Indonesia? The Ministry of Foreign Affairs continuously promotes the scholarship for foreigners learned by Indonesia, such as Dharma Siswa, the BSPI, Beasiswa Seni dan Budaya Indonesia, and Kemitraan Negara Berkembang. So this is the Kementerian Luar Negeri or the Ministry of Foreign Affairs promoting to students overseas. Furthermore, I need to scrutinize several challenges on the practice of academic and cultural exchanges, because I believe that there is always room for improvement by having challenges in front of us. Country-to-country education diplomacy is often being overtaken by institution-to-institution relationship and a broad array of actors. The concept of education diplomacy is getting more complicated, and the competition and or cooperation not into the role of higher education in public diplomacy. It focuses more on the need for colleges excuse me, and universities to develop their own engagement strategies, fee-paying students, chance of higher degree in global rankings, marketing materials, and strategy. And the celebratory moment of MOU signing ceremony is not always followed by sustainable implementation of concrete cooperation, and expectations are sometimes met with deep disappointment. Having knowledge on education diplomacy and science diplomacy is apparently not sufficient. Therefore, let me update you with the latest resolution on education in New York. Resolution on education for sustainable development, the framework of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. The resolution provide inclusive and equitable quality education at all levels, including technical and vocational training. Safely reopening educational institutions for in-person learning, providing increased support to teachers and educational personnel, investing in skill development, eradicating poverty through open education process and technology-supported learning, and inviting the UNESCO to provide support and assist countries. From New York, let us fly to Paris, where Global Convention on the Recognition of Qualification Concerning Higher Education was finally adopted in November 2019 during the 40th session of the UNESCO General Conference. It is the first UN treaty on higher education with a global scope, and it is binding, facilitating international academic mobility and promote the right of individuals to have their higher education qualification evaluated through a fair, transparent, and non-discriminatory manner. Expanding access to higher education and strengthen research cooperation by facilitating international exchanges of students, teachers, researchers, and job seekers. It is also serves as an avenue for further study and employment, and also makes it easier for students abroad to return to their home countries and have their degrees recognized. Promoting the recognition of refugees' qualification, even in cases where documentary evidence is lacking. The benefit of this convention is, for example, there is a person with master's degree on engineering from a conflict-affected country in Africa. Due to humanitarian reasons, he has to be a refugee in Brussels. Because his master's degree is somehow not recognized, he needs to sit in a high school student again to earn formal educational degree for seeking job opportunities. These conventions regulate such situation to have a standard minimum requirement for higher education learning. Last but not least, I would like to summarize the presentation with the broader internationalization strategies for universities and academicians to focus on. First, enriching academic programs, and then enlarging the knowledge and experience base for students, hosting a more internationally diverse student body and faculty, providing more opportunities for their faculty to join international research networks, and developing a wide spectrum of joint activity that will benefit all partners. It is very important to have a total synergy between academician and government to earn the maximum benefits of both education diplomacy and science diplomacy. In New York, we need the assistance of scientists to support us with research-based data as an ammunition to negotiate and understand the context of many specific issues. At the same time, we are happy to update academicians with relevant resolutions agreed upon in the United Nations in New York and other fora. So that's all, Madam Moderator. And if any of you would like to have update information about what we do in New York, you can follow our Instagram account and Twitter account at Indonesia UN New York and also at Muhammad.Koba. Thank you, Madam Moderator. I give the floor back to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Koba, for I think this is very interesting, yeah, for all of us here, especially for the students who wanna go to the United States, yeah, to gain any skills or study there. So here we already have 2 questions, Mr. Koba. First, is there any opportunity for university students to gain skills and experience by interning at UN offices? If there is any, how to get it? Yeah, please, Mr. Koba.
Okay, so one question at a time. Well, this is talking about the interns. Is it right?
Yes, yeah. So they asking about the opportunity to gain skills, opportunity for university students to gain skills in the United Nations.
Well, there are a lot of opportunities. So, but this is the problem with Indonesian academician and students. First, the language barrier. You have to overcome this. You have to be able to express your ideas in English fluently. Or if you have, you want to do internship in the UN in Geneva, you have to be able to speak French fluent. So there are French, Arabic, Spanish, Chinese, Russian, and English. 6 official languages of the UN. Either you master one of them, you should be fine. And you have to be on the lookout, harus rajin, lihat kesempatan di internet, a lot of information on the web, on the UN website, on our website, in the mission of Indonesia to the UN in New York. A lot of opportunities there. So all you have to do is, prepare yourself and search the right opportunities that works for you. I hope that answered the question.
Yes, thank
And
you.
also, I'm sorry, it is not only for international relations students or law students or economic students, the three fields that usually apply to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. But WSO also needs accountant, for example. They also need doctors. If you guys want to go to peacekeeping operations in Lebanon, so it's not only in New York or in Geneva or in Vienna or where else, in Bangkok, or they also have offices in Jakarta, the UN. So you can, this is the United Nations. They are operating everywhere in the world, including in the conflict areas in Sudan, in Lebanon, So, is the sky is the limit. You can, explore the opportunities as you like. Back to you, Madam Moderator.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Koba. So it's not limit to just in New York, but you also can have another opportunities to wide countries, yeah, in the world. And also for the students, you have to open the website, yeah, for the Indonesian UN. And also, of course, in UN, they have opportunities for students, but you should have the classification as Mr. Koba mentioned, you should mastery in, many language, many languages.
Only 6.
Yeah.
The UN has 6 official languages.
Yeah.
Chinese, Russia, French, Spanish,
Wow.
English, that's only 5. Arabic.
Wow. So I think you can speak all the languages that you just mentioned, Mr. Koba.
No, I'm just speaking English.
Oh, so yeah. Yeah, so I think it's not just English we have to master for the language, but also Russian, Chinese, Arabic, right? That's now become the international languages also. Yeah, so thank you for the first answer. We still have a second question, Mr. Koba. I think this is the last question for you. How to tackle the development of soft diplomacy in Indonesia, which is still fall behind from other country. In Korea, they have Korea Foundation, for example. In Japan, they have Japan Foundation. Unfortunately, most issue that foreigners still know that Bali is a part of Indonesia, not in other hands. Yeah, so what do you think about this?
Well, actually, we are doing okay. As far as our standing is concerned, people still look up to us. We're not doing bad in international diplomacy. For example, when we ran for our position in the Security Council, in the Human Rights Council, we were elected by more than 170 countries. And, the member of the UN is only 193. So a lot of countries look up to us. They know us, they respect us, they value the relationship with us. But of course, if you want to talk about soft power, soft diplomacy, this is very interesting because it's not just my job. Actually, diplomacy is your job also. For example, everybody who has, if I may have a raise of hands, who has a Twitter account or Facebook account, Instagram account. When you tweet, when you post something on the Instagram, on Facebook, you are in a way practicing diplomacy. You're promoting your country. So be careful with what you post. If you want us to be in par or at par with you mentioned Japan or Korea, you post something nice for Indonesia. I mean, everybody can be a diplomat. Everybody can be the representative of Indonesia. Teachers, students, businessmen, reporters, non-government organizations, people, anybody. So I put the challenge back to you. How do you want to promote Indonesia abroad? But now Indonesia also has the Indonesia. Actually, we also have helped a lot of developing countries. So we have, somebody mentioned about US aid, Australia aid. Indonesia also have the same institution, so Indonesia aid. So we give, for example, scholarships to the Palestinian government official. We give education opportunities for farmers, fishermen from other developing countries. We also have invited their diplomats to learn in our diplomatic school in Jakarta. So we are getting there. We are, in fact, in some cases, we are already there. So, but then again, if you talk about soft power, it is all in your hands also, not just in diplomat hands like me. I hope I answered the question, Madam Moderator.
Yes, Mr. Koba, thank you. Such a nice diplomacy answer, right? Yeah. So I think currently most of foreigners, they already acknowledge about Indonesia, and many programs I think has been done by the UN to promote Indonesia, like and Bali as a part of Indonesia. So yeah, I think now Indonesia become the most popular in overseas, right, Mr. Koba? And yeah, do not worry for everyone, especially for Indonesian. You still recognized by the Indonesian, even they said, oh, you came from Bali, but you can say, yeah, I'm Indonesian, Bali, a part of Indonesia. Yeah, thank you, Mr. Koba.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I think that's all the question for you. And perhaps if I still have any question, then they can connect with you directly by the private message. Yeah, once again, thank you so much, Mr. Koba, for your precious time. Yeah, even there in New York now is a late night, but you still commit to attend and present and give such inspiring information for us, for students, and for Universitas Negeri Surabaya. All right, now we will move to the next session, yeah, which is we have our third speaker from Chinese Academy of Beijing, yeah. Yeah. Professor Han, are you here with us?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so today our third speaker, Professor Pusin Han, PhD from Institute of Psychology, Chinese Academy of Science, Beijing. Yeah. Before we start, I would like to read his brief CV. So Professor Pusin Han is a professor of psychology at the Institute of Psychology, Chinese Academy of Science. And he received his doctorate in psychology, research on the psychology of aging, cultural psychology of religion, and color perception. And he has published over 200 scientific articles in their English or Chinese, and is on the editorial boards of several key Chinese journals. He was also elected as a Secretary General of the International Association of Applied Psychology, and he was the president of Asian Psychological Association, and he was the past president of the Chinese Psychological Society and vice president of the China Association for Gerontology and Geriatrics. Yeah, so Professor Han, I think that's all I have received for read your CV. And you have, today, you have 15 minutes till 20 minutes to deliver your presentations. Professor Han, time is yours.
Thank you very much for the introduction and for the opportunity to be with you all colleagues in either Indonesia and Asian area. This is a great opportunity for me to share some of my thoughts on a daily practice as psychologists in coping with COVID-19 pandemic. The challenge is great, credit to everyone.
Yes.
And I think all of us need to integrate again during the harsh reality because of the pandemic. So I would like to take the opportunity to share with you my personal experience about integrated health from physical, mental, and spiritual aspects based on my personal practice, either in lockdown or in my social role as past president of Chinese Psychological Society, specifically from some practice of Chinese arts of language, poetry, calligraphy, painting, steel cutting, and so on. So give you some idea about the richful heritage that we Asian people have, and in general, in Chinese culture in specific. Okay, it's my impression that integration of our identity of Asian psychologists is so important that in the globalization, the mainstream, how we learn Western psychology, modern psychology, but incorporate with our own cultural identity. This has become so important in the isolation produced by the pandemic, and also in facing the social service calling for the psychologists in our own cultural setting. Healthy person can be defined through 4 aspects, from individual, social, natural, and universal. Okay, at all levels of existence, we need to integrate our health, holistic health as a whole. Okay, not only as a psychologist, but also as a person. We need to keep our immune system function well. We need to keep our mental health through mind flow and flourishing. We need to live in the universe to enjoy the universal spirit because our either religious belief or our daily practice. Okay. In the meantime, we have an integrated coping strategy in the pandemic. Okay. So I would suggest you all to read this article, Psychotherapy and the Cultural Concept of the Person. And this is a very good article written by Professor Lawrence Kishnaya in Canada, McGill University. He reminds us that all of us has four kinds of existence: egocentric, sociocentric, ecocentric, and cosmocentric. However, as he noticed, that all psychologists around the world focus on or adopted the egocentric concept of a person without any consideration of the problem. Okay, for example, in Asia, especially in China, most of the people are sociocentric. We live in family. We live based on relationship. Yeah, I suppose in Indonesia or many Asian countries, the same cases. Okay. So, whether or not you realize you live on Chinese, your own culture, the dishes. For example, this is my breakfast. This is full of nutrition, colorful, and this kind of noodles is specifically popular in the Asian area, but not Western world. Okay. Our health is based on this, and also we have for daily practice to maintain and promote our health. This picture I took this morning outside the square outside of my hotel, and this is not only personal practice but also social interaction activity at daily basis. Okay, very good practice, as I say. Serial knowledge is not serial mind. Okay. Modern psychology has developed a systematic concept theory skill to explore the nature, the mechanism, the phenomena of psychological practice. Okay. But we still need to bridge in the gap between understanding and wisdom. Okay. This means that the culture is a embedded component which cannot be ignored again in the 21st century. Okay, whether or not you realize that we need to pay our full attention to develop the forum for international or cross-cultural comparison and interaction, communication. And because our clients, we need to serve, to provide our service in our own cultural setting. They grown up in their own family. They grown up in cultural rich schools. They live in a cultural setting, either institution or society, community. Okay, so modern psychology developed concepts, for example, memory strain, work memory strain, 7 plus and minus 2. This kind of concept we are familiar because the textbook introduces it quite often, especially for basic general psychology. But we Chinese know the phenomena 3,000 years ago. Up to 100 years ago, Asian Chinese textbook all prove that we know that because from the poetries 2,000 years ago, 3,000 years ago, up to Asian text 100 years ago. No sentence are longer than 9 characters. Okay. If you are familiar with the Chinese poetry, you know that that's a fact. But right after the boundary of Asian Chinese and written Chinese and oral communication was crossed. The text, the oral communication language was used for written text. The punctuation marks needed, which we not need that before, 100 years ago. This kind of phenomenon means that modern psychology has our concepts, but the phenomenon never changed. We realize that, but we do not use that terminal, for example, memory span, okay? Similar case holds for the episodic memory and semantic memory. As one of the achievements by modern psychology, we found that the pragmatic knowledge or mechanics knowledge or fluid knowledge, crystallized knowledge. One sensitive to the aging process, one not, while the another one not. However, we have discovered 200 years ago, which means that aging process is quite normal. Because elderly people like me, after 50 years, our episodic memory began to decline, along with the increase in the age. Okay. However, we still can produce good poetry, good textbook, good article, essays, because our semantic memory is still good. So, collective unconsciousness of Chinese culture's heritage through all parts of Chinese language, poetry, calligraphy, painting, and seal cutting. I would like to give you some examples for that. For example, this kind of holographic image. We have, this is the 4,000 years ago, for fish, okay, Chinese character. Then 3,000 years ago, in the bronze utensils, it's like this. Then 2,000 years ago, in the stone, marble stone tablets, it's like this. Then we have modern characters written in different scripts, cursive, 1,200 years ago, formalized. Okay, all this kind of script still used nowadays, not only for artwork, but also for communication. Okay, for example, for the seal cutting, I suppose that you all know the embedded cognition, but to me, embedded cultural cognition is important. I practiced seal cutting 40 years ago. Nowadays, I still do that. Here is some explanation for the function of seal cutting, either aesthetics, attention, spirituality, embedded cultural cognition, and so on. For example, this seal is beauty. Okay, the beauty not coming from the aesthetic, the strokes, the balance of the four characters, but also the positive strength content in the wording. Okay, either cut out the strokes or left the strokes, or have a very beauty aesthetics, but also positive content. Okay, this is not popularly practiced nowadays for Chinese scholars, but 100 years ago it's quite popular, almost daily basis for many Chinese scholars. So this type of collective unconsciousness has been forgot or forgot. But this is a very useful health promotion practice, not only scholarly. Okay? So identity as a Chinese psychologist need to be recovered, not only this way, not only self-cutting, but also culturally in general. I would like to share with you pictures of my parents. They took this when I was born. Why is that? Because my parents teaching us the collective unconsciousness in family setting. Okay. I like this. One of my favorite favorite picture, which I took when my eldest brother got married. This picture has many happy memories. About 50 years ago, I was 45 years ago. I opened reading my homework here together with my mother. Before that's done, we have to use oil lantern. Okay, we shared lantern because oil is expensive. So we grown up. I grown up in a family very poor because my parents have seven seven children and adopted two others because my aunt passed away and she left two kids. So 9 kids grown up in a family, so this is a big family. For almost 40 years, my father had to feed everybody in the big family. She grew up quite early, before the sun arrives, and go to sleep as the last one in the family. This kind of loyalty to the family, loyalty to the family rule is a kind of positive psychology to me, or happiness looking ahead. Okay. So I wrote this calligraphy again this year in facing the harsh reality. I think this kind of belief for positive psychology is needed for everyone in the situation. And also, this kind of essays is quite popular in China. We call it lifespan development teaching, almost 2,000 years ago. We like to have it, calligraphy artwork, hanging in the studio, in the room, in the office, to priming the mind flow, okay, and to strengthen our inner abilities in facing any kind of difficulty or harsh reality. Okay. If you want to know more, I would suggest you to read this book, Understanding Emotion in Chinese Culture. We translated in Chinese, published 2 years ago, right before the pandemic. And the daily practice of Chinese calligraphy and painting is very good for longevity. We have quantitative study, qualitative study for that. And we believe that cognitive consciousness is very good for coaching and luckness. And also benevolence belief is good for longevity. Okay. We believe the spiritual universal spirit is even reflected in China's painting. Okay. We need to have the blanket space for the spirit, or the universal spirit. So we use this kind of philosophy in our studio, in our office, in combine all kinds of components together, natural arts, language arts, and so on. So I hope that all of you 14 and with mind flu and flourish nowadays in the pandemic. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Han. That's a very interesting research that you have done, in China. So I think this would be the beneficial information, for us in order to maintain
Sorry, I cannot hear you.
yeah, pardon, yeah. Professor Han, can you hear me? I don't know. We have the back sounds. Perhaps it's come. Yeah. So I think now it's clear. Professor Han, yeah. Can you hear me clearly?
Yes, I can hear you now.
I think we have a bit technical issues. Perhaps the back sound come from your side, Professor Han. Hello? Yeah. I think now that's okay. Yeah. Professor Han, here we have a question for you from our participants today. What is the reason why Confucianism is a cultural resource? As long as I know, Confucianism was influenced the Chinese society 4,000 years ago. Yeah. So what do you think about this question, Professor Han?
Yes. 1,200 years ago, when Confucius students asked him his vision for life, he said that my vision for life is believe in virtue and live for the virtue, keep the social harmony, then practice all arts, including arts of language, of course. For what? For worshiping the God, for harmony with the nature, for social service, and for mind flow, personal mind flow. This is the core doctrine of Confucianism, okay, which has been developed in many ways, including Chinese arts of language, as I showed you.
Thank you, Professor Han. And I think Confucianism is already effect to the psychological area, right? As we know now, we have a positive psychology talking about the positive thinking and talking also about the meditation and mindfulness. So I think it's all about the influence by the Confucianism from Chinese culture, right? So would you mind to give us the tips how to integrating the coping strategies among the physical, mental, and our spirituality. So I think this could be the beneficial for our mental health.
Thank you. This is a very good question and a very important question for every psychology in the Asian area. We have just published an article in Comment Positive Psychology. We found that there is at least 4 problems when Asian psychologists learn positive psychology. The first one is based on empirical research, but ignore the cultural specific setting when we apply that. Okay? It means that the cultural heritage has been ignored in the general study procedure and conclusion of positive psychology. The second problem is that the pre-summary of the positive psychology is that the people are rational rather than emotional, which I do not agree. Okay? As 3 Nobel Prize prove that people more emotional than rational. Okay, from Dr. Simon to Daniel Kahneman to Richard Saller, they prove that most important decision has been made based on emotion rather than rational counting. Okay. The third one is that cultural relics, especially the moral or spiritual components, has been not paid enough attention, given that the 24 virtue, as Professor Seligman and his colleagues proposed, but at least in China, people never mention that. This is dangerous. So, as we people are spiritual beings, okay, but scientific psychology do not recognize that. Okay. Universal spirit, as we Chinese call it the qi, cannot be handled by scientific study. Okay, science, not only psychological science, but also physical, medical, chemical science, have no idea with qi. But the qi is the key component, or universal spirits is the key component, not only for human being, but also for the nature, for universe. Okay, this means that we actually need to redefine or return to the traditional or Asian definition of the concept of the person, which means that we need to return to our cultural heritage. Okay, we need to memorize the traditional concept of definition of a person. Okay. Then the traditional definition of health, of disorder, of the coping strategy, diagnosis, and treatment, like the traditional Chinese medicine. Okay. This is not only for Chinese psychologists, but also for Indonesian psychologists too. You have your own culture, you have your own cultural definition on health, on disorder, on treatment. But it's never been reflected in psychology in Indonesia, as I suppose. Okay. So I challenge you, as I challenge often to my Chinese colleagues, we are a cultural being. Never forget that. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Professor Han. That's, I think, could be the useful for our mental health, especially during this pandemic, COVID-19. Yeah, so I think we should take notes about the tips as Professor Han mentioned. We have to integrate culture as a part of us as a human being, and also we have to use mind rather than we use emotion. And also please promote our spirituality, right, Professor Han? And finally, if we have integrating our culture in our daily life, and of course we will get the balance in our life, especially in the mental health and our career and study. Yeah, I think that's all the presentation and the nice answer, outstanding presentation from you, Professor Han. Yeah, thank you so much for your nice presentation today. And I hope your trip, yeah, because I know you will go outside of the city of the Beijing, and I hope you will have the nice trip today. Yeah, and I hope we can see you in the next forum as well. Yeah, everyone, now, yeah, we will have our 4 speakers, but before that, we will have a 1-minute break, so please stay tuned. everyone. Now we will move to the four speakers from Royal Melbourne Institute of Technology, Dr. Saniat Islam. Yeah, Dr. Saniat, how are you?
Baik, Saza.
Yeah.
Apa kabar?
Oh yeah, you have a good Indonesian.
Not
Okay.
really, just a little bit.
Okay. Dr. Saniat, today we're talking about the fashion industry in the post-pandemic COVID-19, especially perhaps because I was read the PPT. Perhaps this is talking about your current research about the mask reuse, right?
Not really. Can you see my screen?
Oh, yeah, different. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're gonna talk about the fashion industry, okay? But
Yeah.
before we start, please allow me to read your CV first.
Sure.
So Dr. Saniat Islam, he's a lecturer, enterprise and technology and in RMIT University since 2013. At the same university, he earned his PhD in medical textiles in 2017 and his master's in automotive textiles in 2008. Currently, he is researching on circular business models and blockchain and innovation for fashion enterprise, sustainable materials, and supply chain traceability. And for the latest publication, yeah, he has done for the single-use mask could be a coronavirus hazard if we don't dispose of them properly. So I think that's a very interesting research, and I hope I can get the copy of that research.
Sure. It's on my LinkedIn account. If you want to go there, and you'll be able to click that link. I think that's there. If not, I'll post it on the chat here. So anybody is interested, they can look at that.
Yeah, wonderful. So without any further delay, Dr. Saniat, you have a 15 minutes for deliver your presentation. So time is yours.
Thank you, Chairperson. Today, I am going to discuss about some of the aspects of fashion industry and what could be done in terms of its future directions. Obviously, all of the countries are coming out of the COVID-19, and we are looking forward to what are the next steps in terms of different industries. I specifically am going to talk about fashion industry today, so because that's where I work and do my research. Thanks for the introduction, Chairperson. Before I start, basically one of the thing that we have to do as a ritual is basically acknowledging the people of our nation, like the first people of our nation. So I'll start with that. So RMIT University acknowledges the people of Wurrung and Bun Wurrung language groups of the Eastern Kulin nations on whose unceded lands we conduct the business of the university. RMIT University respectfully acknowledges their ancestors and elders past and present. RMIT also acknowledges the traditional custodians and their ancestors of the lands and waters across Australia where we conduct our business, and I am presenting to you today. So let's start with a story. It's a story about four people named everybody, somebody, anybody, and nobody. There was an important job to be done, and everybody was sure that somebody would do it. Anybody could have done it, but nobody did it. Somebody got angry because it was everybody's job. Everybody thought that anybody could do it, but nobody realized that everybody wouldn't do it. It ended up that everybody blamed somebody when nobody did what anybody could have done. So this sort of summarizes, I thought I'll start with a story for you guys to sort of understand what is happening in fashion and textiles industry and what is the way forward out of this. And we are going to discuss about some of my research that I've currently doing and sort of published around this area. So keep in mind this story, and one of the key things that the fashion industry is struggling with now is the huge amount of waste that gets generated through these industries, pre-consumer, post-consumer use, and the industry not keeping up with what is supposed to be done for climate emergency and climate change. And we all know that there is a large volume of textile waste that gets generated through this process. Now, giving you a bit of snapshot of what's happening in Australia. Australia currently has 186,000 tons per textiles per annum. So it's a huge amount of textiles. And one of the interesting bit is Australia, it's nothing to be proud of, but we are the biggest user of textiles. Per person per annum, we use about 31 kgs of textiles. That can be of any sort. And the distressing bit here is we basically throw 90% of this into landfill. So one of the key challenges the fashion industry is sort of going out of the COVID, we are going to go back to normal and business as usual. We are going to start buying different clothes to ornament ourselves and going out and about and so on and so forth, business as usual. However, what do we do with this huge mess of textiles that ends up in landfill? We keep on talking about the sustainable development goals around we heard from Pak Koba that he was talking about sort of individual way of looking at what can be done. Now, there are roles different stakeholders within the industry should play. However, at the end of the day, the consumers who has their sort of consumption behavior. If we look at our sustainable development goals number 12, which talks about responsible consumption and production, we sort of never, and general consumers like us, we sort of never think about okay, this is a new on trend thing and we are going to buy and we are going to get out of wearing that and sort of discard that, or we'll keep it in our wardrobe few years later, collecting dust, it is going to be thrown somewhere. So this is sort of take, make, dispose kind of linear model that we keep on working, and that's a huge problem that we probably need to address going in the future. So let's continue. Now, you probably have heard about this term circular economy. It has been since 2010, Ellen MacArthur Foundation has given this framework that all the industry are sort of started talking about circular economy. What it means basically is we design out waste. There should not be any waste. All the materials should be kept in the loop while using, and we increase the user profile. Nothing should be basically thrown as a remnant of post-consumer. So taking that into context, does circular economy mean circular textiles industry? So that's one thing that we probably are going to discuss today, and hopefully you get something out of it. Now, again, going back to a little bit of snapshot. So we already said there has been a huge amount of waste that gets generated. I'm talking from Melbourne, so keep in touch in terms of the statistics within that demography. So Melbourne, which is Victoria state, we have basically the 95% of the clothes that gets discarded can be avoided to go into the landfill. I'm pretty sure in Indonesia there would be similar story, like, the things that we, because the era of fast fashion, like, we get hooked onto a trend and we buy, impulse buy, and like, it's sort of a social phenomenon that, like, we go for the trend and buy something and then basically discard it, like, when a new trend comes. And this is where, like, things go wrong. And like, we not only consume irresponsibly, but also like contribute to this vast majority of waste that gets into the landfill. So we like, if we look at the worldwide sort of like, like statistics, 30% of the garments go to landfill within a year of purchase. So like 1 year, if you're wearing something for 1 year and it is going for landfill. Textile and clothing and footwear waste accounts for 20% of water use and 8% of greenhouse gas emissions. Like when we are talking about climate related targets that we put forward, it's like 1/5 of like, the water use is from our textile industry. So like, how do we sort of like, tackle this? Now, a circular economy approach means like we design the product such as like, it can be reused, recycled, or put back to the origin in the manufacturing, and like, we keep that in the loop. So basically, it doesn't end up in landfill. So we are basically increasing the frequency of wear and like, making durable products. Now, if we look at basically our textile and fashion value chain, it's quite interesting how things work. Like, I don't know how many of you are familiar with the textile value chain. I sort of thought like, it'll be a good one for us to basically move into that. Like, the value chain and the way it performs activities are a reflection of the history, strategy implementation, and underlying economics of a farm. So fashion industry, basically, like, we talked about providing dignity for anybody to like, perform in a public event or at home. We are not going to be without clothes, that's for sure. But like, how do we go on about making it as a responsible consumption pattern? Now, in terms of the value addition, like, we need to, I would ask you guys to start thinking along the lines of like, if we look at your wardrobe, like whoever is present in this session, if you look at your wardrobe, what are the like, items you have basically was your want versus was your need? Like, when you go out for, say, for example, in a college or like, in a school, one of the things that you need is uniform. So that's a need versus like, I want to have this specific jacket or like, specific fashionable item such as the clutch bag or maybe this like really nice suit or really nice like hijab. So like, there are a lot of items in your wardrobe. If you look at that, you'll see there is a definite, like, there are things that you need and there is a thing that you want. So there sort of like, dilemma between our fashion consumption is like, do we actually need this or we want this? So want and need needs to be like, defined within each and everybody's like, consumption behavior, so that we basically like my previous like presenter actually talked about like, psychology and how it is important. Like when you put up a cause against like, next to a thing that you are doing, you are basically like, prone to make this a bigger thing. Say, for example, if you knew that like, one less item of fashion you are buying, you are not contributing to like, 100 kgs of waste that is going to go into landfill, and like, there is no way to recover that. So if we start questioning our buying behavior or like, our consumption behavior, do we actually need that? Like, those kind of like questions needs to be started to ask within our fashion consumers, which is currently not happening or not happening enough, I would say, like, rather than that. Now, in this like, basically research that I'm going to discuss with you, we sort of looked at the term called traceability and transparency within our fashion industry. Now, most of the people would remember, like, in Bangladesh in 2013, there was a huge incident, like Rana Plaza, like, 1,100 garment workers died. And there has been so many others in China, in like, Vietnam, or in like, India or Pakistan or Sri Lanka. Like, all of these are like global fashion garments, or like ready-made garments hub that produces, like, and then these sort of, like, occurrences happen, and then that, like, you will see a big issue around our uh, like fashion brands going, oh my god, I did not know what like, where my clothes were made. And basically the consumers at the end, they actually don't want to be a part of that. So how do you know that your like, garments are made in a ethically like, sort of like, ethical standard maintaining garments, or like, in the supply chain? The reason for, like, this exercise, or the terms that I'm going to use, is basically traceability and transparency. These are the two like, terms that gets used in the fashion industry for like, getting to know your supply chain. So we sort of started discussing about like why this is important. So companies are becoming increasingly global. Say one T-shirt can be made and assembled within 18 different countries. So if you want to know which part of that, like, the tag was made somewhere, the, like, packaging was done somewhere, the sewing was done somewhere. So, like, it's kind of like really tough to get your hands onto like the supply chain, or the nature of the supply chain that you are basically part of or buying into. Say, for example, you are buying a T-shirt from Zara. Do you know where this was made? It just says like made in Turkey, or made in, like, Vietnam, or made in Bangladesh, or made in China. So where in China, where in Bangladesh, like, did this T-shirt, by the process of making this T-shirt, the person who worked on this T-shirt was properly paid? Was a fair wage given to that? Did this T-shirt become a part of, like, uh, like polluting a river stream, or like, a water stream? Or was some sort of a dye stuff that was used to print on this T-shirt was like, problematic? So these are the information that is not available to the consumers yet, and consumers don't know any better, because I'm going back to that SDG number 12, like Sustainable Development Goal number 12, um, which is responsible consumption and production. So it's not only responsible consumption from the, like, consumer's end, it also is responsible, has to be responsible from the manufacturing end as well. So we sort of tried to look into this research about, like, okay, how much information is available for anybody to understand the value chain, or the ready-made garment supply chain. So we sort of, like, looked at this study. The specific study basically was done in conjunction with Australia and Sri Lanka. One of my master's student conducted this research, and we sort of, like, came up with the research findings, and I'm going to share this with you as well. Now, when we talked about the value chain and the like, I keep on using these terms, so I thought, like, I'll introduce you a value chain. It can be any value chain. I'm talking about specifically to fashion value chain. A value chain is a collection of activities which are performed to design, produce, market, deliver a product or a service. Now, this can be done for a cell phone, a laptop, fashion garments, a clutch bag, anything that you put in there, collection of activities. So that is to assemble a product or a service. So that's what is a value chain. Now, going back to, like, our like, ready-made garments value chain, there are different types of value chain that are currently present. So we can talk about, like, I don't think, like, I need to go into details of every one of them. So if anybody is interested, I can, like, provide some links and stuff like that. But like, the ready-made garments, you'll see, like, probably Indonesia has got ready-made garments export as well. So or Malaysia, Bangladesh, India, there are a lot of countries. So mainly the, there are three main types. One is called the cut, make, and trim assembly, which is CMT. Then the original equipment manufacturing, OEM, and the original design manufacturing, ODM. So these are the three basic models that are there. But CMT is the easiest, and this is just assembly. So if you give everything to a manufacturer who does the assembly of your garments, that's the CMT. So if you have got some proprietary machinery, so that is OEM, and then basically the design, the design was done basically from scratch, and it is a proprietary element, and it's done in a specific way. That's the ODM model. So let's move on. If we look at our the two value chains that are currently in practice. So we are going to talk about say for example, I'll let you to think about a t-shirt. So what do we need to make a t-shirt? The first thing is, okay, we have to source a material. So is it going to be a cotton or a polyester, or is it going to be a blend? So we can say cotton polyester, so it can be a natural fiber like cotton, and then the petrochemicals like based fiber like polyester. Then we are going to make yarns, and then processing, finishing, and then basically each of the stages basically before disposal is up to the retail. So the consumer gets at the point of the retail, so that's where we buy it. And after that, there is sort of a disconnect between the consumers, because consumers, once we buy something from a retail, we don't know what to do with this. At the end of useful life of a garment, what do we do with that? Is there does anybody know what do we do that? How do we that? So the companies, they wash off their hands as soon as they sell the garment to you. After that, it becomes your responsibility, and that's where the problem starts. And we sort of are going to talk about this. And if you look at this, I mean, this is a very linear system. And when we talked about the circular economy, there is nothing circular about it. And this basically take, make, and dispose. That's the model that the three stages that we work. Now, going further, where does this how does this happen within the fashion supply chain? Let's look at in further details. Now, if we look at that, so first of all, say for example, everybody is now within this global pandemic, we couldn't go to physical stores. We could not buy anything from probably fashion stores and stuff like that, but online platform was still there. Now, how do you know, or how do we get hooked to some say for example, I like this t-shirt, I'm going to buy it. How do we get to that? So I have got preferences to a brand, or I saw some advertisement somewhere. So that's the part of the media and marketing that is basically if you are part of Facebook, and I know the younger generation who are students here would be pretty much hooked on with at least Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, there is Snapchat, and so on and so forth. You can you can keep on adding. So you'll always see there are certain amount of advertisement that gets there. So that's the job of a brand in their media and marketing department to sort of force that. And then the design and creative team actually are responsible for the design of the product. And then once you have designed the t-shirt, you send it to manufacturing countries like, say, for example, in China or Bangladesh. They basically do source the raw material, fabric production, dyeing, printing, finishing, and then it comes back to the brand, and the distribution and logistics department basically sends it to different retailers. This could be a local brand or a global brand. And once you have bought this, I think everybody has got that experience of oh, this doesn't fit me, or the size is not there is a size dilemma in every different country. So one country has got the size 10 in Indonesia and size 10 in Australia will never match. So this is a problem. And when we are a global citizen, like, all the countries have got all these different immigrants and, like, migrants, it is a challenge for the fashion industry to maintain certain size aspect ratios. So there will be defects, there will be size issues. So that's when it gets returned. Now, once it gets returned to the brand doesn't know what to do with that. They discard. And then at the consumer end, like, the last portion of it, if we look at the consumer end, after the utilize, like, I like this t-shirt, I bought this, and at the end, what do I do with this? Like, after 1 year, I'm going to throw it away. And that's how the clothing gets into landfill. And in this whole scenario, we have got chemical use, such as like dyes, chemicals, pigments, water use, washing, like, dyeing also uses a lot of washing, and a huge amount of energy that gets used in the process of making it from fiber to the finished good. So that's how the problem happens in our industry. Now, if we look at the current situation in terms of the traceability and the transparency, like based on a study done by Fashion Foundation Transparency Index, there's 150 brands in Australia just came up with they did not have a traceability index more than 11%. So it's a huge problem in terms of understanding. Okay, when we talk about transparency of in the company is disclosing information, we basically go to their website and try to find out where this, if you are interested, a responsible consumer, you will go there and sort of look at, okay, this was made in Bangladesh, this have got this certification. So we basically are aware that this brand is doing the right thing in terms of sourcing from ethical ways of doing the business. But there are a lot of brands who actually does not provide that information for the consumer. So there is an increase in terms of the consumer awareness. Oh, I want this, say for example, in Indonesia, if you are going to buy something from a brand, a fashion brand, do you look at how many of you, I don't know, you look at the tag that is there? Does it have enough information for you to understand where this was made, how it was made, and what you should do while you are using this, and what should you do after finishing using the garment? These are the information that is not currently available, and the industry is sort of moving forward to provide this information for the consumers, and that is the only way forward how we are going to be able to trace our supply chain and being transparent about what is the exact basically, I would say, impact of the fashion industry on the climate climate change and so on and so forth. So let's move on. Now, traceability and transparency, as I was discussing about this, the two fundamental terms, people sort of uses that interchangeably, traceability of the supply chain versus transparency of the supply chain. What we found is basically when people want to say transparency, they actually mean traceability, and when they mean traceability and vice versa. So basically, you need to understand as a company, or what you are asking basically. So comprehension between the two terms is very important. So I sort of thought I'll give you a fundamental understanding of the two terms that get used in our fashion industry a lot. Transparency captures high-level information regarding a supply chain, a product's components, names of the suppliers, location of the facilities, associated certifications, but high-level does not imply vague information. Okay, so businesses can identify all of their suppliers. As a consumer, you can look into their website, and you can basically see everything that they are doing in their supply chain. So how the t-shirt was made from, how this brand is maintaining its supply chain. However, what information you don't get from transparency is the granular data. The granular data actually means okay, a specific design, where this was made, what different dye stuffs was used. So for example, from outside, you can see my face, my nose, my, like, I'm talking to you guys in here, but you don't know what's inside, like, behind the flesh. So if we compare the two, one being like the outside, like, I can see, like, I've got every limbs, but traceability would tell you, like, how many bones I have. Say, for example, I have 206 bones. So when you are going through a traceability exercise for a supply chain, you are going to be able to go to exact details of which specific dye stuff was used to print on your garment, or, like, dye your that t-shirt. So these are very, very important. Like, say, for example, you bought a t-shirt, and I think everybody experienced this in this audience, like, when you buy something and you're wearing it, it gives you some sort of, like, skin rash and stuff like that. So which means, like, you are allergic to that fiber or the dye stuff or anything that is present in that garment. But do you take it back to the like, supplier or wherever you bought it from, that this actually gave me, like, body rash or like some sort of an allergic reaction? So I would like highly recommend, if something like this happens ever to you, please take it back to where you bought it from and actually ask them. That's how we can change the companies working backwards to, like, make sure they are traceable. If they are not traceable, they wouldn't be able to, like, give you the information, like, if you're allergic to specific kind of dye stuff or, like, the fiber that you're wearing. So that's the importance of having traceability and transparency. Traceability is a lot more easier and a lot more accessible in terms of, like, because that's a high level sort of data, but sorry, transparency is high level data, what you can, like, generate for as a company. However, traceability is a lot more like, rigorous, I would say, like, hard to achieve. And that's where, like, the companies needs to go forward when we are talking about post-COVID, like, era. Now, the research that, like, I've sort of, like, giving an introduction to, we sort of talked about, like, the traceability and transparency. What do they, like, what does this mean between the two countries? Like, this was done based on us, like, certain individuals and a survey. So we did survey a general consumer, and then basically we interviewed industry professionals who work within the supply chain to see how much information is being shared between each of the stakeholders. Now, in terms of the finding, what we, like, we basically used an online survey and, like, like one-on-one interview between our, like, stakeholders. So that's just, like, a bit of references. So we had 16 questions with 34 responses, like a small response, but, like, for the time that we got, it was quite convincing in terms of what we found. And we basically interviewed 7 professionals of the industry to further dive into the transparency and traceability exercises within the industry. So some of the key findings that, like, as I mentioned, like, from my previous explanation of, if you look at the tag of your t-shirt, like, I would highly recommend, like, if anybody has got any garments, or, like, if you are joining from the luxury of your home, you can look at any of your t-shirts and look into the tag, what, like, or the care label, what information is there. One thing I can, like, sure shot say, you're not going to get much information other than how you should wash it and iron it. These are the 2 information, and where it is made. These are the 3 information that gets shared in as a, like, in the care label, but nothing else. There is a bare minimum of information being shared. That's what we have found through our research. And basically, like, when we are trying to ask or implement any sort of, like, transparency or traceability exercises, there is a disinterest from the companies, because, like, what do they get out? They basically are very interested in making money or profit oriented sort of, like, exercises. But if you spend time, like, tracing your, like, this is going to be costing the company to like make this information accessible, and someone needs to work really, really hard to get that. And the interesting bit that we have found, there is no specific platform that, like, where you can bring everybody to share information. And that's one of the caveat, or I would say challenge, to disclose information within the value chain of fashion and textiles. Now, there has been no organized sort of, like, way we want to share information so that everybody can access it, be it, like, the manufacturer, be it the retailer, or as us as consumers. So that's the key findings from our research. I would say, like, as shown in this picture. So the brand and retailer, the retailers have got connections with the manufacturer. The retailers have got because they sell the garment to you, so they have the connection. But consumer and manufacturer, there is no connection between these two. Like, we don't know where it was manufactured, what are the details, and so on and so forth. So there is a general disconnect between manufacturers and consumers. So that's a very important finding for this research. And when we sort of, like, look into those interviews, we found that there are like, 4 sets of information that are currently present if we want to like, have better transparency or the traceability aspect of fashion supply chain. Some of the information basically are profit-oriented information, where raw material, product costs, and construction or make is shared. Compliance-oriented, like, the country of manufacturer, like, do you have a waste management policy inbuilt? What are your like, say for example, when you dye a cloth or print a clothing, where are you disposing of your dyeing liquid? Is it going into a river, or like, is it going to be harming the marine life? So those are the, do you have a policy in place? Those kind of, and the composition, how much of a t-shirt, is it 100% cotton? Is it, like, 80% cotton, 20% polyester, 50% cotton, 50% polyester? Those kind of information. Now, impact, this is where the very important stuff that comes when we talk about climate justice or climate emergency. Now, impact oriented, or what is my carbon footprint of making this garment? Raw material origins. Say for example, I am using 100% cotton. Now, the cotton was probably sourced from Uzbekistan, where historically we know that, like, there is a excuse me, where is a tradition of utilizing child labor. So does those information get shared? How much fresh water we are using? Like, every government, because, like, it generates a lot of foreign currency, every government basically gives priority connection of water and gas and electricity to the industry. However, at what cost? These are the questions that the fashion industry or the manufacturing industry needs to start asking. And the people as consumers, like, okay, you are using fresh water, which, like, my like, son or daughter, or my, like, grandson, when they would be like, adult, they could use, whereas we are digging fresh water and using that for making garments, which is, like, when we talk about like, compromising the integrity or the consumption behavior of the current generation, as a current generation, if we are sacrificing the needs of the future generation, we are not sustainable at all. So that's where I think like, we need to start asking those questions along the lines of, am I doing the right thing while, like, buying 10 t-shirts, 20 t-shirts a year, 10 pair of jeans, like, those are the things. And now this is the new category that is going to be really, really relevant in not only textile industry. I can say it's going to be important for every industry. Say, we are very much familiar with this. I don't know whether you can see this, my cell phone. So everybody has got a cell phone. Do you know where does this go after the end of life? Once we, like, upgrade to an iPhone 13 Pro, like, what happens to my iPhone 10 or iPhone 7? Where did it go? Did it, like, end up in landfill? Somebody incinerated it? So these are the questions. When we start looking at our consumption behavior, these are the information, like post-usage. Where does my garment go after I dispose it of? Have I have I thought about like recycling this? Can this be worn worn by somebody else? We'll probably we can give it to somebody who is in need, or like pass it on to the family, or can it be recycled? 100% cotton t-shirts, or 100% polyester t-shirts. Do we have that infrastructure basically to facilitate recycling or upcycling methods? So these are the information that is going to be really, really important in the future going forward. Now, like one of the key things that we found, we don't have that infrastructure now in our fashion and textile industry to share those information. So that is very, very important to bring everybody onto the same platform to share information, so that we can trace it back. Like if the consumer, once you dispose it off, say for example, we have got a tendency of cutting our care label once we buy something, but that care label at the end of your disposal life, someone who is in a recycling center does not know what, it is made of 100% cotton or polyester. Not everybody is a textile scientist who is going to know by feel like it is 100% cotton or 100% polyester. So keeping the care label is very, very important for post future use, or reuse for that matter. Now, in our research, we basically came up with a circular platform that every piece of information can be shared from every part of the stakeholder in a fashion supply chain. So this is sort of a framework that we proposed in our research. Anybody interested, I can please contact me. I can share further if necessary. But currently, what we have found is basically there is nothing like this exists, and there are opportunities for not only universities, every manufacturing industry to come into a platform where we could share information, so that the products that we are making for us, for general consumers, can be better understood. If we don't have the information, and that's where the transparency and traceability becomes so important. Now let's move on to the conclusion, and I've sort of basically said we need to come into a single platform for sharing information. Nothing like this exists. So any researcher or the manufacturer or within a country, it's very, very important to make your policies and sort of your network to bring in together, where you could share information in confidence with your consumers. Otherwise, in the future, the consumers are going to go for a brand or a manufacturer who is doing the things right, by sharing traceable and transparent information about how they do their business. So that's sort of the research finding. So where do we go from here as a fashion industry? There are different ways of tech-based solutions, like blockchain technology, that could be introduced to trace information. We all know that we have heard from our second presenter, I think, Pak Koba, was talking about the United Nations and its relevance. So I would go back to United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, and those are the kind of reporting that the fashion industry needs to get into. And circular economy, I already sort of talked about, where we can design out waste completely from going into landfill, and that's the goal that we all should be working towards. What universities can do, university can foster connections between industry and the consumers by doing the research like this, research initiatives to transform actions to embed circular approaches of doing manufacturing, information sharing, and so on and so forth, and approaches that brings industry into the equation to address climate emergency and raise consumer awareness. So these are the things that as universities post-COVID we can do. And I'm happy if someone wants to do collaborative research or student exchange kind of approach to solve some of these issues that I've raised today. So thank you all for listening. I would like to hear if you have got any questions.
Yeah, Dr. Sania, thank you so much. That's a very informative research for us as I'm a woman, so I really like to use the vision. So from your presentation, yeah, I have awareness to be wise to use it. All right, Dr. Saniat, today we already have two questions for you. Yeah, first, what are your suggestions before we buy the new clothes? Some of Asian brands already implement clothing recycles such as Uniqlo. However, it's pricey. In the other hand, in Indonesia, it's very pricey. And society still choose the low cost clothes, which is easily to damage and could increase waste of the textile. So what do you think about this, Dr. Saniat?
Now, that's a really important question, and sort of very contemporary questions around what should be done. I think I sort of talked about it when we discussed about the responsible consumption and production. It's not only like the manufacturing units or like the brands can do it. When, like, say for example, you said you like to be fashionable. Now you can be fashionable, there is no problem with that, but have you looked at, when you are buying your clothing, did it has it been designed for recycling or reuse, or the company that you bought it from, they have got a take back scheme, like once you are done with it, you can give it to your daughter. That's one way of tackling going into landfill. The daughter can give it to her, like sort of a family heirloom kind of approach, which is common in our Southeast Asian culture. We like to share our clothes with our nephews, nieces, and so and so. That's one way of increasing how we use our garments. Don't throwing it away, or in the bin or rubbish is the last thing that you should be doing. Obviously, if the brand has given a take back scheme, like they are happy to take your clothes back after you are done using it, that is a really, really good, and that's one way we can solve. Like, the companies should always have a take back scheme. Like, you have utilized it, you have paid for it, and I'm going to charge you more so that I can basically bring it to the use phase again by recycling it. So even I know this is the dilemma between should we go for cheaper, or should we go for more responsible buying? If we want to move out from this dilemma, I think the way forward is if something I can afford, it's obviously based on at what level of remember I talked about the need and the want. If I want something, then I can be a little bit more responsible around, okay, I will pay $100 dollars more to basically make sure this product is I'm being responsible for this, versus I can go for a $3 t-shirt which I'm going to be not using after 3 uses. I'm not going to even wash it, I'm going to throw it. So is that a good thing to do? No, not at all. So that there is different ways of addressing this. So basically the consumers are the answer. Remember, it's the we can always talk about somebody who's going to solve our problem, but nobody is going to do it. I'll go back to my story. So it's everybody's job to do this. And as consumers like us, each and everyone who's present here, it's our job to have a good look at how we consume our fashion items or any other items. So that's how we can be a responsible consumer. Thank you.
Yeah, perfect. So be responsible for our fashion. All right, so the next question is how to promote people to use the environmentally friendly fashion products, since they usually prefer the model of the product than the materials. So
Yeah,
what do you think?
that's what I sort of touched on. We are very focused on the trends, and
Yeah.
everybody has got a Like, and it actually is an interesting psychological phenomena. Like, how we want to see ourselves, that's what we want to buy. Like, if we see someone looking good at something, like, the models or the, like, we want to see this range coming next fall or spring, we sort of like intend to go for that. But I mean, like, at some point we need to stop doing that. Like, the fashion industry needs to look at them hard. Like, when we say environmental friendly, like, fashion, what do you mean? My question is, like, what do you mean by environmentally friendly fashion? Is there something like that? It doesn't exist. The moment you are buying something from like, say a t-shirt from, like, any garment item, you are basically not being environmentally friendly, because for that specific piece of garment, someone needed to grow like cotton, someone needed to harvest that cotton, like, diesels were burned to, like, harvest that cotton, and then, like, brought into a manufacturing unit by, like, a plane or a, this is just eyewash when we, or greenwash, the term that we use in fashion industry. The only way forward is basically, as I mentioned, being responsible in your action. And basically, there are companies who are trying to do the right thing and, like, promote them by, like, buying less but buying responsible products. So that would be my suggestion.
Yeah, so once again, be responsible, right? So it's all come from our personality, how we have to facing this pandemic COVID-19 issues with this related with the trends and also the fashions. And the last question is about the universities. Yeah, as you mentioned in your last slides, I think how the university could foster the connection between industry and customers.
That's a very good question as well. So if we, like, the university, what basically university does is provide education, like in our teaching methods. And like, I actually take this really personally, and it's a close to my heart sort of, like, approach, because, like, when you go in depth into sustainable practices, as I mentioned, like, we are one of the most unsustainable industry in this planet. Like, we are sort of impacting so much without, like, if nobody wants to hear the bad part of, like, the industry, like, where people are dying, like, there are rivers and, like, environment being harmed based on, like, my personal ego of I need to look good in a specific garment. So to educate consumers, it's like, when I discuss with my students, I actually go into these touchy subjects. Like, I'll just give you an example. One of my students, like, I'm not going to mention names, but when she first came into like, in our course, and I was teaching, like, I was asking how many pieces of clothing in your wardrobe, like, specifically, like, we were discussing about jeans or denim. She responded, I have 56 pairs of denim. And I looked at her, and everybody was in awe, like, 56 pairs of jeans? Are you serious? I mean, how do you wear 56 pairs of jeans? Like, if I'm living for 40 odd years, like, my lifetime, I don't have more than, like, 3 pairs of jeans. So what are you doing? So these are the, like, reflection of, and people are so proud about their fashion practices, which is, like, we need to start questioning those. Why would you buy 10 pieces of t-shirt when you can, like, do with 2 or 1? How many, like, pairs of jeans you need in a year, or, like, in a 5-year period? So these are the things that I discuss with my students, and those guys are getting informed around these sort of practices and, like, the malpractices. And basically, we are creating the next set of leaders who are going to start going into the industry, asking these really, really odd questions for the people to understand. And coming into this sort of forum, I probably have, like, shared what I think about the fashion industry. So this is what universities could do, and collaboration with the industry and university doing research is the way forward, in my opinion. Thank you.
Yep, that's a wonderful Q&A sessions, Dr. Saniat. And
My pleasure.
yeah, I think as educators, we have to encourage our students to be aware for their own fashions. Yeah. So the fourth session, I think we have done well. Yeah. Thank you very much, Dr. Saniat, for your participating with this
Thank you.
event, and I hope we can see you on the next agenda with you
No
and
problem.
RMIT. All right.
Thank you.
So, ladies and gentlemen, now we are going to our last main session that I should make a take-home message for all of us here. First, we have to integrating the school programs between school programs, parenting, and society to increase the children well-being. Also, we have to be educated in all areas, either soft skills and hard skills, to have the opportunity go to the UN. And also integrating culture in the mental health is the significant for us, could be the useful for maintaining peace and our well-being. And for just a current discussion, we have to be wise for our fashion before we buy, as well as when we already buy, and be recycle, or we can upcycle our fashion. And also for the higher education, please give the education and policy perhaps for the government for to the fashion industry for achieving the sustainable goals. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I think that's all our discussion today. And I would like to thank you to all our presenters and audience today. Congratulations for all of us here. You have made our day. And thank you for attending for all sessions. If you have additional questions for the presenters, you can ask them, and you can connect with them with the speaker one-to-one through a private message or meeting. Be sure to visit our official website on unifur.unesa.ac.id to get the update news from us. So enjoy the rest of UNIFUR annual conference and see you on the tomorrow.